Hello, and welcome to the Hadassah Magazine discussion, a joint program of Hadassah Magazine and Hadassah's Engagement Division. I'm Lisa Hostein, the executive editor of Hadassah Magazine. We've got a big crowd again this evening, and we're grateful that you have all joined us, whether you're here for the first time or you've been with us from the beginning. The large crowd is no doubt due to the in part in popularity of these programs, and also even more to the popularity of our featured guests. But I'm sure it's also in part because of our need for comfort and community in these devastating times. Amid all the ongoing pain as we worry about Israel and all the innocent civilians paying the price for the Hamas atrocities, and we pray for the safe return of the hostages, the body of another hostage, Yehudit Weiss, was discovered by the Israel Defense Forces in Gaza today. The magazine discussion is a bi-monthly event that enables us to delve a little deeper into content published in the magazine, in this case, our November-December issue, which was originally intended to be entirely devoted to books in celebration of Jewish Book Month, which generally runs the month preceding Hanukkah. But with the horrific Hamas attacks on October 7th, the ensuing Hamas-Israel war, and the reverberations around the world, we reworked some of the issue to get in some meaningful articles focused on what has preoccupied all of us for the past 6 weeks. Still, we kept several of our book-related features, including the one which is the basis for this program tonight, What Makes a Book Jewish? But just as we adapted the print issue of the magazine, we are also going to explore some issues that we might not have envisioned when the program was planned months ago. Questions like, what is the role of a Jewish writer at times of Jewish crises? We also know that books provide an escape and a sense of comfort in troubled times. I'm sure I'm not alone in having read more books in recent weeks than usual, so the timing of this event is fortuitous. I'm truly delighted that we will be joined in this conversation by 3 esteemed writers, Dani Shapiro, Allegra Goodman, and Ruth Knafo Setton, whom I'll introduce in a minute. But first, a few notes before we begin. For those of you who are already Hadassah members and donors, we thank you for your support of Hadassah, the Women's Zionist Organization of America, which is the largest Jewish women's organization in the United States. The group's mission is to effect change and advocate on such critical issues as ensuring the security of Israel, combating anti-Semitism, lobbying for Holocaust education, and promoting women's health equality, including reproductive rights. And of course, also to support Hadassah's 2 world-class hospitals in Jerusalem, as well as youth aliyah villages that help at-risk children, and Young Judea, the Zionist youth movement. As you saw from the opening video, the work at Hadassah's 2 hospitals becomes even more critical in times of emergency, and the number of patients treated is now up to more than 250. If you're not already a member, please consider joining so you can enjoy the magazine, which is free with membership, as well as all the wonderful programming the magazine and all of Hadassah provides. And of course, your donations for both this event and all of Hadassah's work are always welcomed and valued. And now to introduce our guests. Allegra Goodman's novels include her latest, Sam, which was a Read with Jenna book club selection, The Chalk Artist, Intuition, The Cookbook Collector, Paradise Park, and Kaaterskill Falls, which was a National Book Award finalist. Her fiction has appeared in the New Yorker, Commentary, and Plowshares, and has been anthologized in the O. Henry Awards and Best American Short Stories. She has written 2 collections of short stories, The Family Markowitz and Total Immersion, and a novel for young readers, The Other Side of the Island. Her essays and reviews have appeared in many national publications, including in the New York Times Book Review, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. Dani Shapiro is the author of 11 books and the host and creator of the hit podcast Family Secrets. Her most recent novel, Signal Fires, was named a Best Book of 2022 by Time Magazine, The Washington Post, Amazon, and others, and is a national bestseller. Her most recent memoir, Inheritance, was an instant New York Times bestseller and named a Best Book of 2019 by Elle, Vanity Fair, Wired, and Real Simple. Both Signal Fires and Inheritance were winners of National Jewish Book Awards. Dani's work has been published in 14 languages, and she's currently developing Signal Fires, which has just been released in paperback, for its television adaptation. She is the co-founder of the Siren Land Writers Conference in Positano, Italy. Welcome to you, Dani. And finally, last but not least, certainly, is Ruth Knafo Setton. Ruth was born in Morocco, and she is the author of the novel The Road to Fez, a multi-genre author. Her award-winning fiction, creative nonfiction, and poetry have been published in many journals and anthologies, including Best Contemporary Jewish Writing, Shocking Book of Modern Sephardic Literature, Tiferet, and the North American Review. She has received honors and fellowships from the National Endowment of the Arts and other groups. For many years, she taught and still teaches Jewish literature and creative writing at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. Welcome to you all. Really, such a delight to have you. So before we get into the discussion of what makes for a Jewish writer and makes a novel Jewish, I want to operate on the premise that we all know to be true, that you are indeed Jewishly identified writers, right? Is that accurate, I would say? So given that, I want to start the conversation reflecting on the multi-pronged crises that continue to weigh so heavily on all of our minds and hearts. So Hamas's horrific attacks against Israel on October 7th, the after effects in Israel and among Jews everywhere, the ensuing Israel-Hamas war, and all the innocent civilians, as well as the explosion of anti-Jewish hate in this country and around the world. So I want to ask each of you first, how are you processing all this? And is there a particular role that Jewish writers have at this time? Dani, let's start with you.
Thank you, Lisa, and you know, Allegra and Ruth. It's really lovely to be with you. It's just good to be gathered, right? So processing. I mean, it's so huge and impossible to metabolize. And I think I'll speak only for myself, but I think this is true for writers generally. We are very porous creatures who absorb the world around us in an attempt to reflect the world around us. And so I am increasingly finding my voice in all of this, but I really felt very voiceless and in the beginning, starting on the 7th of October, and almost sort of stripped of the ability to find words.
So I think, we are all writers, and there are many writers out there, and we work in different genres, and there are different ways to process it. And, there are journalists processing it right now, and people writing letters right now. And, I wrote a letter today, in fact, as a parent of a child on Columbia University campus, because I was upset. But I am not by trade a letter writer. I am a novelist, so I process slowly. And I think I will respond, but it may take me some time because my work is very long form and long term. And I think those, Ruth and Dani both write books as well. And, these are long-term projects. So I think actually when you're looking at novelists, our processing, you might see something in a few years, in terms of how we metabolize all of this and process it all, as opposed to like the quick soundbite or the letter or the op-ed or the post.
Ruth, what's your sense?
Well, I was just telling Lisa before earlier that I did write an op-ed, which is very unusual for me because I've been torn, all these emotions, rage, frustration, not sure what to say, where to start, and how. There's so much that we could say. And when you're confronted with so much ignorance about the actual situation, people who have no sense of history or geography or, complexity, it's like no one can hold two opposing thoughts at the same time. Slogans, sound bites, as you said, I'm in the midst of a novel that takes a lot of it takes place in Israel with a Jewish woman protagonist. And so I'm so steeped in that country and in the setting. And when I just feel like it's so personal, and having lived in Israel, it's hard. And like Dani and Allegra, I feel very, I know it's going to affect this book. There's no way it can't. I got that, sort of that op-ed out of the way, but there's a lot going on. And just one thought I have, I think that we have to, one thing I'm realizing as I study, I can't help it. I try to stay away from social media, but I do find myself looking. And I think among the many things that are missing, one of them one of the important things that we as writers, I think, need to pay special attention to is point of view. It's probably the most serious decision we can make when we write a novel. Who's telling the story? It's a completely different story depending on who we choose as our narrator or our voice, or if we have, several voices. But we have to make sure that we are not defined by other people telling our stories for us. I think we have to make sure that we tell our own stories, that they hear our voices, so that it's too easy to just kind of talk over us and for us, and to say the Jews, or the, I can say much more about that, but I think we have to think about giving our story, because POV is crucial right now.
Mm. Have any of you had any particular experience, either, Dani, I know you've been on a book tour and giving public, I wonder if people have come up to you, if you've said anything, even just, expressing sympathy, right, in the media. I think your book tour really coincided with right after the horrific events, right? Or whether you've had interactions on social media, which again, I think a lot of us try to stay away from to some extent, but it's impossible to completely. Anybody want to share an experience that was particularly noteworthy?
I would say that right before I went on book tour, that was when I, for the first time, tried to write something on social media, because there are so many hot takes out there, and there's so much reactivity, and there's so many slogans, and it's been so upsetting, and yet social media is also like one of the ways that it's a tool, and it's one of the ways that we communicate, and this is our first social media war. This war was designed, the attacks, the atrocities were designed to be disseminated on social media. It's a war of images, so before I went out on the road, I tend to go quite quiet and listen when, especially in the kind of the kind of cacophony that we're all experiencing, and I realized I couldn't, and that I had to, and that I had a responsibility, and winner of the National Jewish Book Award is emblazoned on signal fires, and I was going out in the world, and I felt very proud of that. I didn't feel frightened, and I don't feel frightened personally, and I haven't had any interactions that have felt uncomfortable in that sense, in an anti-Semitic sense, at least overtly. But what I wrote about, and this just really, it fascinated me. I didn't use certain keywords. The word Hamas wasn't in my post. The word Israel wasn't in my post. The word Palestine wasn't in my post. What was in my post was the fear of wading in, the fear of speaking. And the post was largely about the anti-Semitism that seems in our world to be let loose in this way that is something I hoped to never see in my lifetime. And the comments came flooding in, and most of them were people saying thank you. Most of them were a lot of Jewish people saying thank you. You gave voice to something that that I've been feeling and that I couldn't find words for, which is a part of what we try to do. I had one very close friend who is Jewish and who wrote to me saying, "I'm very disappointed in you." And when we spoke about it, finally, she said, "I just feel like you were, like it was like wishy-washy." I didn't feel like I was being wishy-washy. I felt like I was being careful. And then of course there was the usual hate speech, like, layered in all of the, many hundreds of comments. But it showed me that kind of instant knee-jerk response that's happening has a very silencing effect. And the more I feel, in a way, to what Ruth was saying, the more I feel like I'm being silenced or I'm allowing myself to be silenced, the more that feeling rises up within me of, oh, no, 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 no. So we'll see where we'll see where that goes, but I'm feeling it increasingly. It's getting hotter and stronger.
Mm.
Either of you want to share anything?
I guess the question will be where do we let it out? Because like you're saying, social media, it is knee-jerk responses. I don't think that's the place for, I sometimes I do like a little, a little comment. Of someone who I thought was a friend, a social media friend, put it that way, who wrote on a post and made sure I saw it. I just invented a new word, genocide apologist. And it was clearly aimed at not just me personally, but, and without thinking, I just said, oh, well, I wrote back, I just invented a word too, terrorist apologist. And then I thought after, and she blocked me right away. And I thought, okay, well, I'm glad. I would have, if she hadn't blocked me, I would have blocked her. But after I thought, well, what did I really, I'm not sure that's the way to do it either. It just hit like that, but I've blocked many people. I can put it that way. In the past month, I have unfriended people. I have blocked people. I don't want to see their posts because I know exactly what they're going to say. Where they're coming from. I don't think we need that. There's enough horrible stuff going on. But I think we'll need to find our ways to do this.
It seems that that's one of the big outcomes that so many people are talking about. Their, sense of people who they thought were friends are not really friends, or that they're just so in a different world. I mean, I think that's going to be one of the issues that percolates in the Jewish community for a very long time. And it is interesting because in your world, again, the progressive, primarily literary world, it cropped up, as I'm sure you're aware, at the National Book Awards last night. So for our audience, it's just really just kind of news that just developed the last couple of days. So there was the National Book Awards, not the Jewish Book Awards, the National Book Awards, which Allegra was a finalist for and meant several years ago with one of her books, was having its big ceremony in New York last night. And a couple of writers, sponsors, got wind of the fact that a group of the finalists was going to be making a statement about Gaza and the war. And Zibby Owens Media, who's basically a fairly newcomer to the literary scene, she's developed her own media company, and she was one of the sponsors. And she heard about this and she withdrew her sponsorship. So again, I don't know if any of you watched it. I didn't watch it, but I read some news reports about it today. They did end up issuing a statement. Apparently, several of the finalists at the very end of the program got up together and issued a statement that, my sense, in a way, it was a little bit toned down because it called for a humanitarian ceasefire as opposed to just a ceasefire. But more importantly, it did not mention the hostages and it did not mention the Hamas attacks. So, I wonder, I mean, this is your world, right? I mean, this is the world that you, are big names in by and large. How is this? What did you think about this particular, incident? Did you just kind of ignore it and say, I can't really deal with this, it's too painful? Or did you, did anybody reach out to you? I'm just curious if you have any take on it.
I mean, I didn't watch it and nobody reached out to me. I have to say, I'm completely not surprised to hear that writers got together and made a statement, because that is the politics of many writers. So it doesn't surprise me. I guess they have a right to make a statement, and Zibby Owens has a right to take away her money, and they're exercising their choices, right? It I mean, as far as the social media thing goes, I agree with what Ruth was saying and Dani was saying, that it's such a sort of corrupt forum. And I'm not sure these are good forums for real discussion or real engagement. This is just people acting out, right? These aren't people on the ground in Israel fighting for their lives, or or trying to protect their children in Gaza. You know, these are privileged American people, you know, acting out in different ways. So, you know, it doesn't surprise me.
Right.
Social media went very quickly from a place to post about your book tour and cute pictures of your puppy and nice sunsets and you know the whole sort of, you know, like the most toxic thing about it was, you know, the creating of a sense of like sort of some edited perfect life, you know, which with everybody's understanding that that's not real, or most people's understanding, I think. But I am kind of blown away to see. I would have expected it on Twitter. I would have expected, I mean, or X or whatever it's called, but the instant way that it became this incredibly divisive, from minute one, when people started posting about it, and the necessity to stand with, you know, or, you know, announce your, you know, like there's like announce your politics, announce your, you know, it's almost it's performative, and it's like wearing some sort of badge, when it's so much more complicated than that. And you know, like Allegra said a little while ago, the holding of these two, you know, like the complexity of what's going on. Social media is not a place for that. You know, 10 years from now, when Allegra publishes a novel about this, you know, that may be time, you know, or Ruth's op-ed, or, you know, I do my own little bits of activism, like on my podcast. I've been in between seasons choosing previous episodes to then have someone come on and talk about that episode. Like, so people like Bessel van der Kolk, or, you know, great, you know, psychologists, writers, theologians. And I'm choosing for the next one a Holocaust story. That's just my way of just, what can I contribute without having, I mean, there is no point in arguing with the people that you block, right? You know, they don't want to hear your, you know, they don't want to hear what you think. And you don't want to hear what they think. And there is no place of rapprochement, which is terrifying and incredibly upsetting, but it's just true. There's no, like, where is the place for empathy and true empathy and real civil discourse?
There's no place for subtlety either. There's no place for gray. You know, I feel like as a writer, I'm often in the between. You know, you could get me to say one thing and then a minute later believe something else. I'm just always, it's kind of maybe wishy-washy in a way, but because I just feel like I can understand all these different perspectives, but it's so black and white. And there's no, like you said, Dani, you have to take sides. You have to stand this way. And as someone who has been in not just the writing, well, as a creative writer in academia, which is its own story, but I've been in academia for many, many years, and I've been watching this come. I just didn't realize it would explode like this. You know, as I was the director of our Berman Center for Jewish Studies for years, the writer in residence there. I've been teaching Jewish lit, women's lit, and watching as all I was thinking of them as the post people, you know, postmodern, post-Zionist, post-structuralist. And the thing is, they had nothing for post, like it's post this, but what was the alternative? What were they offering? Oppressor, oppressed, split the world in two. That's it. And somehow, to my amazement, the Jews were the oppressors. And I was thinking, how did this happen? If you look at Jewish history in the world, if there is a more oppressed people from the beginning of time, I haven't seen them. Somehow we were the oppressors, and everyone else were the oppressed, especially the Arab world, the Palestinians. So when my first novel came out, when Road to Fez came out, it's about Jews in Morocco, but it goes back to Morocco, and they didn't know how to deal with it because there was a Morocco, that's good, but Jew, bad. However, Jew from Morocco, I could pass. So I would be invited to all of these very far left events, to give talks. The book was taught, but they didn't know that there were. I was scolded sometimes. You shouldn't have criticized the Arabs, but there are facts. I mean, the Jews from Arab lands are probably the most unknown refugees in the world. All the Arab countries, they had many, many Jews. You look now. I mean, I can just speak for Morocco, but we had in the height about 250,000 Jews. There are now fewer than 3,000, and they're all congregated around Casablanca, because just in case they want to be safe near a city. But the thing is, Morocco was the most tolerant of all the Arab countries. And the weird thing is today, Road to Fez, the novel, is being taught in universities in Morocco and being translated into Arabic. They don't, but when you get to these people, oppressed, there's no way to make sense of someone like me who kind of crosses all these borders, has all these hyphens, but I'm not the only one. There are many of us like this, it's just.
Right. All right, I think you've all established your Jewish creds at this point. So let's shift to the original focus of this group. But obviously this conversation is very important that we've been having. But to the degree that one's experience and background informs your writing, I'd like each of you to just briefly give a little sense of where you came from, what your background is, and how it brought you to becoming a writer. Allegra, why don't you start?
So I'm a Jew from Hawaii. I grew up there. My parents taught at the university. People are always sort of like, how did you end up in Hawaii? So my parents were academics. They taught at the University of Hawaii, and I grew up in a really small Jewish community in Honolulu. So, I didn't know about sort of institutionalized Judaism. Like, we had no JCC, we had no summer camps, we had no kosher butcher. We kept kosher at home, and my mother ordered our meat from California, which arrived on ship. We had an extra freezer, and she would go to the dock and pick it up in the station wagon and bring it home. So, I was Jewish, but not in the Jewish world of New York, New Jersey, the five town, that world of Judaism. So I think it informed my writing because I was truly a minority, there were 4 Jewish kids in my high school class. The people just didn't know what Jewish people were. I was very much on the margins of the centers of Jewish population. So it gave me a sense of otherness, and it gave me a perspective on Judaism that is different. And my early stories are about Jewish people in Hawaii. And I was really interested in those juxtapositions, those ironies that develop, the complexities of identity that developed from being in that situation. And then from there, I started writing novels about different kinds of Jewish people. And I guess the American Jewish community is very much my subject, both in its observant part of the perspective, part of the spectrum, and the non-observant, non-affiliated, even non-identifying Jews. I take all of that as my subject.
Okay. I grew up on the other side of the country in a small town in Rhode Island. There were 7 Jews in my class, I think, but you definitely beat me. I mean, Hawaii, there was some Jewish life.
Not that it's a competition.
Right. Ruth, you started to tell a little bit about your background, but how has it informed your writing?
Oh, very, very much so. I was born in Morocco, and my family had been in Morocco for many generations. On my mother's side, they came from Spain after the Inquisition. They escaped, my ancestors escaped from Spain and made it across the Strait of Gibraltar to Morocco. On my father's side, he had been part of Morocco. His family had lived in the Atlas Mountains in Morocco for many, many years. They had come from Israel, back then, and made it there. So we were there for generations, but my dad decided he wanted his kids to grow up free. We came to America. I was a little kid. I spoke French before English. I was definitely an outsider, an outlier on everything. And my dad had made this decision when we were kids, my sister and I, that he wanted us to to be so free, like we wouldn't, I remember him saying, you can do anything, be anything, but stay invisible. It took me years to realize what a kind of heartbreaking message that was, but we just kind of toned down the Jewish. So I never had a bat mitzvah. I wasn't with other Jewish kids. So I was also kind of, on the outs, but I was fascinated by it. And so when I wanted to, the first novel was in a sense tracing the immigrant journey in reverse. I went back to see, where did I come from? Who were those people? What was my heritage? And after that, though, I wrote about a lot of, I tried to, well, the first novel, when I submitted my very first novel, I got back a note from an editor saying, you write well, next time write about the real Jews. I had written about Moroccan Jews. This paralyzed me. I was already sensitive and, very insecure. And I just thought, oh my God, at least for over a year, I couldn't write a word. When I did write again, I decided, okay, I'm not going near there. I'm going to write an American novel. I was living in Texas at the time, and I decided to write about, I don't know where I came up with this old Texas rancher named Sam. He had a horse named Gus. I found a little town named Rosario, Texas. I stuck them there. I started writing this novel that I knew nothing about ranchers. I knew nothing about any of this, but I thought, I'm going to be American if it kills me. I was writing this novel, and then something happened as I was writing. Around the third chapter, they got new neighbors who moved next to the ranch, and they were making noise and coming in and singing and cooking, and it turned, they were singing Moroccan songs and cooking couscous and doing all this stuff. I'm like, what the heck? You don't belong here. To make it short, I must have started 5 novels, and in each one, chapter 3, the Moroccans would come to town. And I finally realized, they have nowhere else to go. They have nobody else to tell their story to but me. So that's how I really came into it. I think it was out of loneliness and desperation. And I just, started writing. And
that's so interesting. So Dani, what's your background, which, some of us may know new pieces of it emerged later on in your life, but what was your formative background that informed your writing?
I grew up in that sort of triangle that Allegra describes in New Jersey, in a bedroom community of New York. But it was a very strange little area where there were some Jews. My parents moved from New York City to this suburb of New Jersey, Hillside, New Jersey, because my father was from an Orthodox family and he wanted to be able to walk to shul. And there was a particular rabbi that a lot of people were flocking to. My mother then had a fight with that rabbi, and we never set foot in that synagogue ever again. But there we were in Hillside, New Jersey, and there was this mix of, there were some survivors there that were friends with my parents. There were a lot of people who were not Jewish and who were not happy that a Jewish family had bought the particular house that my parents bought. There was a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism that I grew up hearing the stories of. I don't remember it because I was a baby, but our lawn was set on fire. TV dinners filled with dog excrement were left on our front porch. Cars drove over our lawn and, wrecked the sprinkler system. These were stories that I grew up knowing. And I was very aware that my parents had dug in and didn't just move. And I went to, my father was Orthodox, my mother was not. And it was an agreement that they had when they married that she would become observant for him and to raise a family. But she was in fact an atheist, and sort of went through the motions. And so I was their only child. I went to a Jewish day school, Salman Schechter school, which was a compromise. I think my father would have liked me to have gone to a yeshiva. That I did until 7th grade. And then my mother sort of won that battle. and they sent me to a prep school. So I went from the whole world is Jewish, everyone in my school is Jewish, to no, the whole world is most definitely not Jewish, and this prep school was Judaism was not part of the culture. And to add to that, this sense of otherness that you both used, both Ruth and Allegra used that word. I think, does being a writer make us other, or are we other and then we become a writer? I mean, to me, otherness feels like it's an absolute prerequisite for the kind of work that we do. And I felt completely other, and I didn't know why. And when I began writing in college and then in graduate school, my first novel was a very Jewish. It was very autobiographical, so it was a thinly veiled story that then, like Ruth, my version of the Moroccans showed up. Like we're not in control of our material. Like our inner lives we're slaves to our inner lives. They dictate what we end up doing. And in my case, I eventually, my work was very much, driven by Jewish themes. Then in 2016, and people listening, some of you may know this story, but I did a DNA test because my husband was doing one, and so he asked me if I wanted to. I wasn't curious. I knew everything about my family history, especially on my dad's side. A very storied New York City Orthodox family. My grandfather is one of the founders of Lincoln Square Synagogue. There was just yichus up the wazoo on my father's side of the family. I was very, very identified with those ancestors. And they had done a lot of good in the world. And I had an uncle who started the OU, so the stamp on kosher food. It was his brainchild. He literally started it. This was all stuff that I was very identified with. So 2016, I do this DNA test just for kicks, and my results came back that I was half Jewish, and that my 99.9% Eastern European Ashkenazi understanding of myself was simply not true. And I was able to come to learn this, I'll keep this very short, but I was able to come to learn that my parents had used a sperm donor because they had struggled with infertility. And the donor that was used was Swedish, French, Irish, German, English. And what's important about that in terms of my evolution as a Jewish writer is that I look just like my biological father, the sperm donor. I don't look like my parents. I don't look like the Orthodox part of my family. It really looked like someone wandered into the wrong gathering, like went into the wrong door, like that door was over there. And it was commented upon all my life. My not looking Jewish was commented upon all my life, which contributed enormously to this feeling of otherness. Why am I being told I don't belong? I belong. I would start listing for people, and it followed me well into my adulthood. I would double down. I would say, raised kosher, spoke fluent Hebrew, 2 sinks, 2 dishwashers. Yes, I mean, like establishing my Jewish cred because it was called into question. And really, in the light of that discovery, I feel I became even more self-identified as Jewish, because I came to finally understand why people felt moved to ask me those questions, and also why I felt so other, because my very identity had been based on something that wasn't true. It wasn't, we are the stories that we're told from the time we're very small. Whatever they are, our identities are formed by those stories. And so if there's something false in that story, or obfuscated, or hidden, or secret, then it just sort of boomerangs, and there's that feeling of, I don't know why I feel this way. There must be something wrong with me. So that I really actually think that it made me, I'm grateful that I had the whatever that is, the gift or the the ability to find words and to become a writer. But I also feel that sense of otherness and alienation contributed enormously to my becoming a writer, because I was and am always searching.
Such an interesting evolution story, really, of all of you. And so now that actually brings us to the central question, right? What makes a book Jewish, right? Now we know what makes you as writers Jewish, or what made you as Jewish writers. So in the article that this whole conversation was based on, that ran in the November-December issue of Hadassah magazine, which if you get the magazine, you either got it recently or you will get it soon. So just look out for it. But we had a whole piece that all of you contributed to, beautiful blurbs answering the question, what makes a book Jewish? And in the introduction, Nora Gold, who's the editor of a literary online journal called jewishfiction.net. So she posited that there's always been controversy over what it means to be a Jewish novel. Some people just say it's, all you need is one character or a Jewish author, and other people define it more narrowly. And she quotes Ruth Weiss, the professor emerita of Yiddish and comparative literature at Harvard University, very renowned in her field, as using a term centrally Jewish, meaning that Jewish literature has to be centrally Jewish, which apparently was a phrase originally coined by Cynthia Ozick, and which Weiss seems to mean, and to her it means reflective in some way of Jewish experience, Jewish consciousness, or the Jewish condition. So, and Ruth Weiss writes that in the work of Jewish fiction, the authors of characters know and let the reader know that they are Jews. But like any definition, writes Gold, it's obviously not simple to define Jewish experience or consciousness or the Jewish condition. So what I want to actually do is read one line from each of you that you wrote and contributed to the article, and ask you to expand on it, okay? So Allegra, you go first, all right? So you wrote, in my work, Jewish themes and characters are sometimes clearly visible on the page. At other times, my Jewish subjects are almost imperceptible, like a watermark on paper. In all cases, my Jewish background influences my art. So you talked about that already a little bit in your opening and your description, but can you expound on it a little bit more? Because we know, like in Kaaterskill Falls, it's all Jewish, and your most recent book, Sam, which was really a compelling and poignant coming of age story, I think the word Jew is mentioned like twice in this very offhanded way. So expand on that a little bit about how you kind of came to that sense of wanting to write outside the Jewish world.
Yeah, I think that I define Jewish book by its content, and some of my books have a lot of, they really overtly discuss Jewish experiences, Jewish holidays, Jewish life cycle events. They have Jewish characters who are very consciously engaged in their Jewish lives. Sam, my most recent book, Sam doesn't even realize that she's Jewish or that her father is Jewish until sort of halfway, when he sort of mentions it in passing. And I actually think there's an absence there. And so that absence is the Jewish content in that book. And, it is an absence for a lot of people in our community. They don't have a Jewish identity. They don't have a Jewish education. They barely know what being Jewish might mean for them, and they don't even know the heritage of their parents or their grandparents or their history. And that to me is also very real. So that absence becomes part of the Jewish content in Sam. So that is a case in which it's very much like the watermark underneath in the paper, underneath the words, rather than sort of the more overt Jewish content in some of my other books.
So interesting, right? Like you said, a commentary on American Jewry today, right? A lot of it is absent. So Ruth, you wrote in your piece, as a professor, my concern with what makes Jewish fiction Jewish is to give my students a taste of the amazing diversity of Jewish voices, not just Ashkenazi, but also Sephardi, Mizrahi, Israeli, Indian, South American, Orthodox, LGBTQ, etc. So how does that Moroccan heritage, and again, you've talked about it a little bit, but you also, in an essay, interesting essay that you sent me, you consider yourself someone whose life is a hyphen and living between two question marks, again, which you've touched on a little bit. But how does that make you more focused on a different set of Jewish voices that might not get as much attention?
I think I had to, because when I started, I felt, and I still, the truth is, I felt exiled in a way from Jewish, not just, in American literature, I kind of expected it when I came as an immigrant, because I started writing before multiculturalism became like a trendy, hip sort of thing. I was other. But to be exiled by Jewish writers and editors really hurt, because then I felt like I was, my voice didn't, it didn't count. Like if I remember another editor, a Jewish editor, telling me he really loved another book I wrote, but he thought it would be a shelf of one. And I thought, well, what's wrong with that? But of course, they don't want that, So my feeling was, whatever I write, I'm not a dogmatic person. I'm not trying to, in my writing, it's very different than when I teach. Though I have the same goal always, just to connect. It's just, I want to connect with people. But I thought I have this vision, put it this way, I have a vision of Jewish literature. And it's like a Jewish world cafe, like under the sun, and a lot of voices and different experiences, and the ones who are the watermark on the page, with the absent, defining themselves by their absence, ones who learn about themselves later, ones who have suffered traumatic experiences because of their Judaism, immigrants, exiles, refugees. We are witnesses to so much of the world, so much that has happened in history. We're a part of it. We're disturbers of the peace, where, we have so many voices. And I guess because it probably stemmed from the fact that I was left out. I felt like if there was a house, I was not invited in. I had to make my own way in. And I knew I could write, I had it, so when I taught, I just made sure that my students were exposed to many different voices. I wanted them to see the power and richness of what Jewish writing can be. And I firmly believe that one of our problems as a people and as writers is that I just feel we're more exclusive than inclusive. And I just feel that if we would put all our voices together, we'd be so powerful. Because, Jewish writers are amazing. We have such stories to tell, we're such power. And I would just love to see that you can see, this is I'm very passionate about this, and I really feel strongly about it. And so I tried just, when in my writing, I'm not trying to be, here's a Moroccan character, not anymore. Now that the Moroccans they come to town, they stay, they're in my books. But the novel that's coming out next year I have one Jewish character in it, and she's Black and Jewish, and she's wonderful. And I'm thinking I loved her so much. She was supposed to be like a secondary character, but I think I'm going to write about her again in another story. But I try to bring in just some bits of life, different. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah,
but
no, it does, actually, bringing different voices. I think we all are realizing in recent years the importance of not being, Ashkenazi normal, or however that term is used, because I think we tend to in America focus more on that community, and there's no question there's a very rich, many other Jewish heritages that form our community as well. So yeah, thank you. So Dani, your piece in the magazine is adapted from your remarks at last year's National Jewish Book Awards, where you won the J.J. Greenberg Memorial Award for Fiction. And you said then, what makes a novel a Jewish novel? Does it need to be written by a Jew, or have a rabbi as its protagonist, or a cantor, or maybe a psychoanalyst? Does it need to be set in Israel, or wartime France, or Scarsdale? The late great novelist David Foster Wallace once shared this parable. Two young fish are swimming along when they cross paths with an older fish. The older fish calls out, "Hey guys, how's the water?" and they then swims on. A few moments later, one of the young fish turns to the other and asks, "What's water?" To me, as a human being and as a novelist, Jewishness is the water I swim in. Beautiful, beautiful words, but I want you to expand on this. How does this water flow through your novels? And again, you've talked about your evolution somewhat, but let's talk about specifically your latest, Signal Fires. How does that water flow through that kind of story and the stories that have come later in your life that aren't as explicit?
I think with Signal Fires, I was very clear that within myself, as these characters started materializing for me, there's seven characters in Signal Fires, and they're all, I think of them as a constellation of characters. They're woven together in a kind of tapestry that some of them know about and some of them don't yet know about and discover later in terms of what their significance and importance is to each other. I knew that they were Jewish. There's one, Alice, this character who's married to a guy named Schenkman, so we know he's Jewish. Maybe Alice wasn't Jewish, maybe, no, but I think she probably was. The rest of them are solidly in this kind of culture, neighborhood, world where the whole street that much of the novel takes place on, Division Street, in a fictional town called Avalon, but that is basically a Westchester suburb. They moved there, they sort of migrated there during a period of time when this neighborhood was very culturally Jewish. And then over time, the novel spans the course of 50 years, though it's not chronological. Over time, the neighborhood changes, other families move in. It continues to evolve. And the neighborhood that I grew up in is now actually Orthodox. I couldn't have imagined it when I was growing up there, 50 years ago, that it would become, well, and all of the young people the families with many, many kids who moved there because of the synagogue that my father moved there for all those years before, that we never went to. So I was interested in places over time, but very much with a Jewish lens. But I was also aware, certainly, it's not like it was an intellectual decision. It evolved through the writing, that these were assimilated Jews. They have their JCC, they have their synagogue, they have their memories of bar mitzvahs and various sort of milestones and moments, but they're not. It might not be the very first thing that they would say about themselves. Maybe one or two of them it would be, but most of them it wouldn't be. And I remember when Signal Fires first came out, I got a note from an irritated Jewish reader because I have one of my characters thinking about how he wishes he was home eating his usual late night snack of a bologna sandwich washed down with a glass of milk. Which, think what you want to about that, sort of like, ew, anyway, but but that's what he would take to bed with him. And this reader was upset with me for not portraying these characters as kosher. And it was just this very interesting, I enjoyed, the exchange, because the point to me was, you create characters. It's in a way like, they're alive for readers, for readers to argue about. Once we've finished creating them, I feel like when I listen to readers talk about a book of mine, it's like I'm watching a tennis match. Oh, that's so interesting. Oh, you thought that? Wow. But I don't feel, is Signal Fires the most Jewish of my book? In a way, I think maybe yes, because it's a very spiritual book at its heart, and I poured a lot of my own wishes and hopes and yearnings into it, which are very Jewish wishes and hopes and yearnings. I can't really separate that out from anything else about me. I would also add that my one novel that I think is my least successful novel, I mean, from a creative and literary standpoint, was my second novel. And nobody should go read it. I'm not even going to mention the title, but it's, I couldn't have told you whether those characters were Jewish or not. I couldn't have told you what their Jewishness meant to them or didn't mean to them, you know, where it was within their fabric. And that meant I didn't know them. And so that knowing, you know, to the, to the core of who our characters are, feels like that's the work of writing fiction. And so in Signal Fires, these are Jewish characters, and they take it for granted, which goes back to, I'm very glad I'm not working on a novel right this minute, because, you know, as you were saying, Ruth, it's the world changes, and then what do we do with the work that then reflects that world? And I don't think that I could have created such happily assimilated Jewish people right now.
Yeah.
Which suggests, you know, percolating thoughts already in terms of the possible future, right? I mean, we know that COVID-related books, there are a lot of them out already now, right? A lot of authors have written this, so we'll certainly wait and see. I hope you don't mind just holding on for a few more minutes as we conclude, and there's two questions I want to take from the audience. There's so many, one, Devor is asking, there are so many historical fiction books written about events in the Holocaust. To me, this seems to take away from the true history of the Holocaust. What do you think? Anybody have any thoughts about that?
I mean, I'm never going to write a book sort of set during the Holocaust, because I don't think I have the right, really. But I've written books with characters who were affected by it and who live in the shadow of it and are descended from people who were affected and lived in the shadow of it. So you can't really escape it. So, you know, I think there again, it's as it's shadowed our community, it then becomes part of our work.
Okay. And another person's asking, is it not a good time to write stories about Israel? How is the publishing world handling these stories with so much anti-Semitism now, even in mainstream publishing? Anybody have a sense of that?
I think that remains to be seen. I think it's hard to imagine that that on the level of choosing what books to bring out into the world, that is going to be a deciding factor, but maybe that's naive and just hopeful of me.
Okay. Well, I really want to thank you all so much. I mean, this has just been a very enlightening and important conversation, and I encourage our readers to check out our chat box where there are links to learn more about all three of our guests and their work. So if you want to just hang in for a few more minutes, I just want to share a few concluding notes, particularly on some upcoming events. And again, this was such a wonderful program because a lot of what Hadassah Magazine is about books. We have a very extensive book review section, and we have this one book, one Hadassah program where every other month we have a selection. And again, people come together in a forum just like this to interview the author. So our next One Book, One Hadassah will be on Thursday, December 21st at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, featuring Meryl Frank, author of our next selection, Unearthed, A Lost Actress, A Forbidden Book, and a Search for Life in the Shadow of the Holocaust. Frank, who's a longtime women's rights activist, a U.S. ambassador to the UN Commission on the Status of Women, and a former mayor of Highland Park, New Jersey, in this memoir traces her journey to unravel the truth about her family's Holocaust history and the importance of Holocaust memory in addressing anti-Semitism today. There's a link for it in the chat box. If you want to register, go right ahead. And also, please save the date for our first One Book, One Hadassah on the road. We are actually going to be on the road live in person in Los Angeles on February 22nd for a very special program with Israeli author Ayelet Gundar Goshen, the author of the new book, The Wolf Hunt, which is an eerily timely novel that came out last year but can't be more pertinent, about Israelis in America, anti-Semitism, and a mother's fears for her teenage son. The event will also be broadcast virtually. It's going to be at 7 p.m. Pacific time, so make sure you all take a nap that day if you're on the East Coast, so you can stay up till 10 p.m. to watch. But that's February 22nd, so put it on your calendar. If you're interested, we don't have the registration yet, but if you want to get information both either for in-person or the broadcast information, you can email engagement@hadassah.org or look for details in future Hadassah at Home emails, which all members should get. And if you're not a member, like I said, go ahead and join tonight and you can get that information. As always, I want to really give a big thanks to Libby Barnea, our deputy editor, who helped plan this program, and to the magazine's digital editor, Ariel Kaplan, who both promoted and produced it. And a shout out to our partners in the engagement and marketing divisions who are always instrumental with the details in making these events happen. And again, a huge thank you to Dani, Ruth, and Allegra, not only for sharing your insights with us today, but also for the work that you do and the writing you do to enrich all of our lives. Books are indeed a source of inspiration, an escape, and a comfort, something that we need more than ever these days. And so we really appreciate the work you do, and we will look forward to what you produce in the years ahead. And we'll think back to this conversation about whether it had any impact or not. So I thank everyone for joining us today. Once again, I encourage you to become a Hadassah member if you're not already one, and to support the important work that Hadassah does. Please stay safe and educate yourself to do what's needed to stand up for Israel and against anti-Semitism in these dark times. Until next time, goodbye.